The woman behind the reception hall grabbed my wrist so hard her fingernails pressed through my shirt cuff. "Please," she whispered, "don't let Rachel marry your daughter. She already destroyed one family." Before I could ask her name, she looked past me toward the parking lot. Her face changed. Not fear exactly, recognition. Then she let go and hurried toward an old silver Buick parked near the dumpsters. I turned and saw Rachel standing beside her white Subaru, one hand resting on the open driver's door. My daughter's fiancé was smiling, but her eyes were fixed on the woman driving away. "Who was that?" I asked. Rachel closed the door. "Nobody you need to worry about." That was less than 2 weeks before the wedding. I had driven to Lakeside Pavilion in Westerville to drop off 2 framed photographs for the wedding reception. One was of Emily at 8 years old, missing both front teeth. The other showed her with her mother Susan on a beach in North Carolina, the summer before Susan got sick. I was 55, a city building inspector in Columbus, and I had spent most of my adult life noticing things other people missed. Cracks above windows, water stains under fresh paint, a door that didn't quite close because the frame had shifted. Rachel's stories had started feeling like that door. For 6 months, every attempt to arrange dinner with her parents had fallen apart. First, her father was recovering from a stroke. Then her mother had religious concerns about the marriage. A few weeks later, Rachel said both of them had decided not to attend the wedding at all. Emily hated talking about it. "Dad, not every family works like ours," she told me one Sunday over pot roast. "Rachel has boundaries. You have to respect that." I did try. Since Susan died, I had worked hard not to become the father who confused love with control. Emily was 31, smart, steady, and better at reading people than I was, or so I believed. Still, Rachel's details kept moving around. At dinner, she said she grew up in Dayton. 2 weeks later, I heard her tell one of Emily's co-workers she was raised outside Cincinnati. When I asked about it, she laughed and said, "Close enough." That night, after the woman in the parking lot disappeared, I carried the frames back to my truck. Under the cardboard corner protector, I found a folded piece of paper. "Ask Rachel what happened to Megan Cole." I sat behind the wheel for nearly 10 minutes before pulling out my phone. The first result was an old wedding announcement from 7 years earlier. Rachel Bennett was standing beside another woman smiling under a headline that read, "Megan Cole and Rachel Bennett announced their engagement." I stared at the screen until the pavilion lights clicked off behind me. Rachel had told Emily she had never been engaged before. The drive back to my house should have taken less than 30 minutes. Instead, I pulled into 2 different parking lots because I couldn't stop thinking about that engagement announcement. Rachel had told Emily she had never been engaged. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a lie. By the time I reached home, the July sun was dropping behind the trees in my neighborhood on the northwest side of Columbus. My little brick ranch looked exactly as it had for 28 years. Susan had planted the maple tree out front when Emily started kindergarten. It was tall enough now to shade almost the entire yard. Funny how trees tell the truth. People don't always. I microwaved leftover meatloaf, opened my laptop, and searched for Megan Cole again. There wasn't much online. A LinkedIn profile, a Facebook account with mostly pictures of hiking trips, and a golden retriever named Murphy. Nothing dramatic. I stared at the message box for several minutes. Finally, I typed, "My name is Daniel Mercer. My daughter is engaged to Rachel Bennett. I found an old engagement announcement with your name. I'm sorry to contact you out of nowhere, but I need to know one thing. Is my daughter safe?" I almost deleted it. Instead, I pressed send. I slept about 4 hours. At 8:12 the next morning, while I was checking permit requests at City Hall, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. "This is Daniel." A woman answered quietly. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, my name is Megan." I walked out of the office and into the parking garage. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. I wondered if someday somebody else would call. Her voice wasn't angry. It sounded tired. "I don't want gossip," I said. "If Rachel made mistakes years ago, people change. I'm only trying to protect my daughter." "I know." Another pause. "Can you meet me halfway Richmond, Indiana tomorrow morning? I was hoping you could just tell me." "I could." She hesitated. "But if this were my daughter, I'd want to look someone in the eye." The next morning I drove west before sunrise. We met inside a Cracker Barrel just off Interstate 70. She recognized me immediately. "You look exactly like Emily." That surprised me. "You've met her?" "No." She smiled sadly. "I've seen pictures online." She ordered coffee. I ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it. Finally, Megan opened a worn blue binder she'd carried under her arm. "I loved Rachel," she said, "for almost 4 years. What happened?" She emptied our joint savings account 6 weeks before the wedding. I felt my stomach tighten. How much? Almost $23,000. She slid a bank statement across the table. I read every line. Transfers, cash withdrawals, luxury hotel charges, airline tickets. She told everyone I'd become abusive, Megan continued. None of it was true. Were her parents against your relationship? Megan looked genuinely confused. No, she shook her head. They paid for most of our wedding. That wasn't what Rachel had told Emily. Not even close. They loved me. She handed me another document. A check written by Thomas Bennett. $18,000. Wedding expenses. I thought maybe, I began, in that I was a bitter ex. She gave a tired little smile. I would think that too. She reached into the binder again. This is why I asked you to come. She handed me printed screenshots. Emails. One caught my eye immediately. Rachel had written, I'm sorry I took the money. I convinced myself I deserved it. I looked up. If all this happened, it did. Why wasn't she arrested? Megan leaned back. Because she threatened to accuse me publicly of stalking her if I fought back. My parents wanted me to move on. She looked out the restaurant window. I did. Then she looked back at me. But I never stopped worrying she'd find someone else. I sat there for a long moment. People can grow. People deserve second chances. I'd believed that my whole life. But second chances usually begin with telling the truth, not building new lies. Before we left, Megan pulled one last sheet from the binder, an old property record. The Bennetts used to live here. She pointed to an address outside Dayton. If you really want answers, she met my eyes. Go talk to her parents. The next morning I drove there. The house wasn't empty. It was abandoned. Every window was boarded shut. An Orange County notice was nailed to the front door. The county notice had faded enough that I had to step close to read it. Foreclosure completed, property transferred. I stood there for a moment looking at the weathered porch swing hanging crooked from one chain. Somebody had once cared about this place. The flower beds were still outlined with old bricks. Wind chimes rustled under the front eaves even though there was no one left to hear them. A screen door creaked across the street. An older woman carrying a watering can watched me for a few seconds before calling out, You looking for the Bennetts? I am. She walked over slowly. I'm Rosa Alvarez, lived here 23 years. I introduced myself. I'm Daniel Mercer. My daughter is engaged to Rachel Bennett. Mrs. Alvarez's expression changed immediately. Oh, Lord. Those two words told me more than she probably intended. You knew Rachel. Knew her since she was riding a pink bicycle up and down this street. She looked toward the abandoned house. Her parents were decent people. What happened here, she sighed. Rachel wanted to start an event planning business. Thomas co-signed a loan because he believed in her. Did the business fail? I honestly don't know if there ever was much of a business. She shrugged. Money disappeared. Credit cards piled up. Loan payments stopped. And they lost the house? She nodded. They tried to keep it. Thomas worked overtime even after his stroke. Linda picked up bookkeeping jobs. Wasn't enough. I looked back at the boarded windows. So where are they now? Mrs. Alvarez hesitated. I probably shouldn't. I understand. I took out my wallet and showed her a picture of Emily smiling beside Rachel at Thanksgiving. My daughter thinks Rachel's parents don't want anything to do with this wedding. Mrs. Alvarez stared at the picture for several seconds. They told you that? Rachel did? Mrs. Alvarez slowly shook her head. They've wanted to see her for years. She disappeared inside her house and returned carrying a small notepad. They're in Huber Heights now, senior apartments off Brant Pike. She wrote down the address. Before handing me the paper, she touched my arm. Mr. Mercer. Yes. Don't go there expecting monsters. They're not. No. She looked toward the empty house again. They're heartbroken. An hour later, I pulled into a quiet apartment complex. It wasn't depressing, just modest. Small brick buildings, fresh mulch around the shrubs, American flags hanging from a few balconies. Somebody had planted tomatoes in buckets outside one door. Apartment 214. I knocked. Footsteps. The door opened halfway. The woman from the reception hall stared at me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then her shoulders slumped. I knew you'd come. And I was the one who tucked that note beneath the picture frame at the pavilion, Linda admitted quietly. I didn't know any other safe way to warn you. I'm Daniel Mercer. I know. She stepped aside. Please come in. The apartment was spotless. Older furniture. Family photographs. Most of them had been turned face down. A gray-haired man stood slowly from a recliner, leaning on a cane. Thomas Bennett, he said. His handshake was firm despite the cane. I'm sorry about the parking lot. Linda sat on the couch and folded her hands tightly together. I got scared. How did you know I'd be there? Rachel and Emily's wedding website was public, she said. It listed the venue and the delivery window for family photographs. I thought I could speak to you without causing a scene. Rachel saw you. I know. Thomas looked at me for a long moment before asking quietly, Is Emily happy? The question caught me off guard. I thought she was. He nodded slowly. So did we. Linda walked to a small desk and returned carrying a folder. We've been waiting for someone to ask questions. She handed me the first page. It was an email, supposedly from me. The sender's name read, Daniel Mercer. The message said Emily and I didn't want Rachel's embarrassing parents anywhere near the wedding. I stared at it in disbelief. I never wrote this. We know. Thomas gave a weary smile. Rachel told us you did. I must have read that fake email 5 times. Every line sounded polite. Every sentence sounded reasonable. And every word was a lie. I've never sent anything remotely like this, I said. Linda nodded. We know that now. Thomas reached for another folder on the coffee table. There are 4 more. He wasn't exaggerating. One email supposedly came from Emily apologizing that she wasn't comfortable meeting Rachel's parents before the wedding. Another claimed I thought their financial situation would reflect poorly on our family. A third said we hoped to avoid unnecessary awkwardness by keeping both families apart until after the ceremony. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure neither side ever questioned the other. I looked up. Why didn't you call me? Linda gave a sad little laugh. We didn't have your number. Rachel wouldn't give it to us. Thomas added quietly, She told us you didn't want to hear from us. The room fell silent. It struck me then how carefully Rachel had built this wall. She hadn't simply lied to Emily. She'd lied to everyone. Linda stood and walked to a bookshelf. She picked up a framed photograph. Rachel in her early 20s. Thomas with both hands on her shoulders. Linda smiling proudly. It wasn't always like this, she said. I believed her. There was nothing rehearsed about the pain in her voice. When did things change? I asked. Thomas answered. After she started that business. He leaned forward. She asked me to co-sign a loan. How much? $120,000. I couldn't hide my surprise. That much? He nodded. I'd worked 38 years for Dayton Power and Light. I had good credit. She said investors needed to see family support. What happened? We never really knew. He rubbed his forehead. There were clients, then suddenly there weren't. Linda quietly added, the money disappeared faster than the business did. Thomas looked embarrassed. I kept believing the next month would be better. Instead, creditors came. The mortgage fell behind. Finally, they lost the house. I should have said no, he murmured. No, Linda corrected gently. You should have had an honest daughter. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Linda opened another envelope. This is why we were so frightened. She slid a legal document across the coffee table. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then I saw the heading. Quitclaim deed. The property listed wasn't their apartment. It was a 6-acre parcel outside Dayton. Thomas noticed me studying it. Rachel brought that over last month. What did she tell you? That signing it would help with taxes. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. I inspect buildings, I said. I'm not a lawyer, but this has nothing to do with taxes. Thomas's face drained of color. I knew something felt wrong. It transfers ownership. Completely. Once it's properly signed, notarized, and recorded, it could transfer whatever ownership interest you have in the land. Linda covered her mouth. We thought maybe we were just too old to understand the paperwork. I looked closer at the property description. The address sounded familiar. I pulled out my phone. A quick county search confirmed it. The state had already approved preliminary plans for a logistics park less than a mile away. Land values in that area had jumped dramatically during the past year. I looked back at Thomas. This property isn't worthless. No, it could easily be worth $200,000. Thomas slowly sank back into his chair. My grandfather bought that land after the Korean War. Linda whispered, Rachel knows that. I nodded. I think she does. Then another thought hit me. Emily owned her mother's house outright. No mortgage. A healthy investment account. Enough savings to help pay for the wedding without borrowing. I suddenly saw a pattern that made my stomach turn. Rachel wasn't hiding her parents because she was ashamed. She was making sure neither family compared notes before she had access to everything she wanted. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. One text. Rachel. I know you went to Dayton. We need to talk before you make a mistake you can't undo. Rachel's text stayed on my screen the entire drive back to Columbus. She knew where I'd been. That bothered me almost as much as everything I'd learned in Dayton. I hadn't told Emily. I hadn't told anyone. So how did Rachel know? The next morning, she answered that question herself. She'd asked me to meet her at the Panera Bread in Dublin, just off Tuttle Crossing Boulevard, 8 o'clock, before either of us went to work. She was already there when I walked in, sitting near the windows with a cup of black coffee and a blueberry muffin she hadn't touched. She smiled politely. "You've always been punctual." "I try." I sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she folded her hands. "You went to see my parents." "I did." "I wish you hadn't." "How did you know?" "My mother called after you left," Rachel said. "She still believes every difficult conversation can somehow bring us back together." That answered one question, but it raised another. "They're not the people you described." She looked down at her coffee. "They're very good at first impressions." That wasn't the answer I'd expected. I waited. "My father," she continued quietly, "controlled every decision I made growing up. My mother never stopped him." "That's not what they told me." "No, because abusive parents rarely introduce themselves that way." She said it so calmly that for a moment, I questioned everything I'd heard the day before. Rachel wasn't yelling. She wasn't defensive. She sounded tired. "I left because I couldn't live like that anymore," she said. "Then they needed someone to blame when they lost the house. They told me you asked your father to sign over his land." Her expression didn't change. "He promised me that property years ago. With a quitclaim deed, it was the easiest way. You called it tax planning. I simplified it." That answer didn't sit right. I leaned forward. "Rachel, I saw fake emails." She closed her eyes for a second. "I shouldn't have done that." "You admit they were fake?" "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "I was desperate." "Desperate for what?" "Peace." She looked directly at me. "My parents never respected boundaries. They would have shown up, cried in front of Emily, told their version of history, and turned the wedding into another family disaster. So you impersonated me." "I made a terrible decision." She paused. "But I did it because I knew they'd listen if they thought it came from you." That was the first thing she'd admitted that matched the evidence. It almost made the rest of her story sound believable. Almost. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. "I know Megan talked to you." "She did." Rachel gave a bitter laugh. "Of course she did." "Was anything she said true?" "Some of it." She looked out the window before answering. "I left her. After taking $23,000, I took money that belonged to both of us. Without asking. I paid back part of it." "Did you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she asked quietly, "Mr. Mercer, have you ever spent years trying to escape the version of yourself everyone else insists on remembering?" That question stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. Because people do change. I'd seen it. I'd known men who came home from Iraq completely different from the boys they'd been. I'd inspected houses where families rebuilt after losing everything. Second chances mattered, but they only worked if someone stopped lying. Rachel leaned closer. "If you tell Emily everything right now, she'll cancel the wedding before hearing my side." "I've heard your side." "No." She shook her head. "You've heard pieces." Then her voice became noticeably colder. "Emily still trusts me." The sentence landed differently. Not loving, not grateful, possessive. She continued. "After her mother died, she needed someone. I was there." I didn't like the way she said it. "As long as you stay out of this until after the honeymoon," she continued, "I'll arrange a meeting with my parents. We'll fix everything." "You expect me to wait?" "I expect you to stop digging." I stood. "I can't do that." Her face hardened for the first time. "Then don't be surprised if Emily blames you for destroying the happiest thing that's happened to her in years." She picked up her coffee. "I won't fight you, Daniel," she smiled. "I'll simply let your daughter decide which one of us she believes." Emily called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight. "Dad, did you go to Dayton?" I closed the inspection report on my desk. "Yes." There was a long silence. Rachel told me. "I figured she would." "She said you've been contacting people from her past." "I have." "Why?" "Because things weren't adding up." She let out a frustrated breath. "You promised you'd respect our relationship." "I promised I'd support you." "That's not the same thing." "No, it should be." I looked through my office window toward High Street. Traffic crawled past City Hall like any other Tuesday. "I've found things you need to know." "I don't want to hear accusations." "They're not accusations. They're from her ex. They're from her parents, too." Emily's voice rose. "Her parents abused her." "Emily. They lost their house because of gambling." I froze. "Gambling?" That's what Rachel told me. That was the third version of the story I'd heard. First it was a failed business. Then abusive parents. Now gambling. "Who told you that?" "Rachel." "I was in their apartment yesterday." She didn't answer. "They never mentioned gambling." "Because addicts don't advertise it." I rubbed my forehead. "We need to talk face to face." "No." I'll come over tonight. No, Dad. Her voice cracked. I can't do this anymore. Before I could answer, she hung up. That evening, I sat in Susan's old recliner staring at the family photographs on the fireplace mantel. When Susan was alive, she had always known how to reach Emily. Not by winning arguments, by asking the right question. I wasn't Susan. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe I'd crossed a line. At 31, Emily deserved to make her own decisions. Who was I to investigate her fiancé behind her back? I honestly didn't know anymore. The next morning, my phone rang while I was inspecting an elementary school roof in Upper Arlington. Megan. Her voice was shaking. Rachel contacted my employer. What? She told Human Resources I've been stalking her. I stopped walking. Are you serious? They're opening an internal review. Can she prove any of it? No. Then why would they investigate? Because employers have to. I heard her take a slow breath. I haven't spoken to Rachel in almost 7 years. That settled something inside me. Rachel wasn't simply defending herself. She was attacking anyone who threatened her version of events. That afternoon, I drove to Worthington to meet the attorney Megan had recommended. Patrice Holloway had practiced real estate and financial fraud law for nearly 25 years. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything on her conference table. The fake emails, the quitclaim deed, the bank statements, Megan's screenshots, Thomas's paperwork. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You've uncovered a disturbing pattern. But, she smiled faintly. I always have a but, I figured. Patterns aren't evidence of a crime. I nodded. I know. The forged emails, civil issue unless significant damages resulted. The quitclaim deed, perfectly legal if signed voluntarily. What about the money? Old claims. She folded her hands. The strongest issue you've shown me is something else. What? The timing. She slid the quitclaim deed beside Emily's wedding invitation. She's trying to acquire major assets immediately before and immediately after this marriage. Exactly. But proving intent is difficult. So what do I do? Patrice looked directly at me. You stop chasing rumors. I've already stopped. You gather documents, real ones. She stood and walked to a whiteboard. If Rachel is planning financial fraud, she wrote 3 words. Follow the paperwork. Paperwork, she said, tapping the board, lies much less often than people do. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a direction. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the truth. And the truth, if it was going to protect my daughter, would have to be strong enough to stand on its own. 2 days later, Patrice called. I think I found something. I left work early and met her at her office near the Franklin County Courthouse. She had several documents spread across the conference table. Tell me, I said. She slid one filing toward me. Recognize this company, Midwest Celebration Partners, LLC. No. You should. She tapped the statutory agent address listed on the filing. It was Emily's house. I stared at it. That's impossible. It was registered 3 months ago. Emily had never mentioned owning a business. Patrice handed me another document. The organizer and statutory agent is Gregory Shaw. The name doesn't mean anything to me. It might to Megan. She picked up the phone and placed it on speaker. Megan answered on the second ring. Hi, Patrice. I need to ask you one question. Go ahead. Do you know a Gregory Shaw? There was complete silence. Finally, Megan said, I hoped I'd never hear that name again. Who is he? He used to own the event company where Rachel worked. Were they close? Megan laughed bitterly. Close? Another pause. They were inseparable. She explained that Gregory had taught Rachel how wedding contracts worked. Vendor deposits, escrow accounts, cancellation policies, payment schedules. He always knew where the money moved. My stomach tightened. Did he have anything to do with your canceled wedding? I could never prove it. But several invoices were fake. After ending the call, Patrice looked at me. We need to know whether Gregory is still involved. That evening, Emily texted to ask whether I could feed Jasper, because an emergency appointment had kept her late at the counseling center. I still had a spare key, mostly because I fed Jasper whenever she traveled or worked late. The orange tabby greeted me exactly the way he always did, by demanding dinner before acknowledging my existence. Yeah, I muttered. I know who's really in charge here. After filling his bowl, I noticed a thick wedding planner sitting open on the kitchen island. The visible page carried the name Midwest Celebration Partners. I told myself to leave it alone. Then I saw Emily's name beneath a payment authorization and remembered the LLC. I turned only the pages attached to that agreement. Vendor contracts, florist, photographer, catering. Everything looked normal. Until I reached the payment authorization pages. Several invoices listed processing through Midwest Celebration Partners, the same company Patrice had found. The numbers didn't make sense. $38,000 had already been transferred. Almost every payment carried a clause that read, "All deposits become the property of the designated planning partner upon processing." I photographed only the pages that were already open on the island. I wasn't about to search through my daughter's private papers. Jasper jumped onto the island and planted himself directly on top of the paperwork. "Really?" He blinked at me. "I swear you're as stubborn as your owner." He refused to move. Only after I tore off a slice of deli turkey from the refrigerator did he reluctantly step aside. "Bribery," I said. "I guess it works on everybody." The next morning, Patrice reviewed the photographs. "This clause isn't illegal by itself." No. She pointed to another page. "This is." Attached behind the contract was a financing agreement Emily had never mentioned. The guarantor line carried Emily's name. Her signature was there. At least it looked like her signature. Patrice compared it to the mortgage paperwork Emily had signed years earlier when Susan's estate transferred the house into her name. She frowned. "They're unusually identical, meaning it may have been copied from another document," she said. "But similarity alone isn't proof. We'd need the lender's original file, the electronic submission records, and possibly a document examiner." She laid both documents side by side. A chill ran through me. If Emily never authorized it, then we may be looking at forgery and financial fraud. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt we weren't chasing scattered pieces anymore. We were finally looking at the center of the puzzle. And somewhere inside it, Gregory Shaw was waiting. Patrice spent the next 2 days digging through public records while I tried to act like life was normal. It wasn't. Emily still hadn't returned any of my calls. She texted only once. "Please give me some space." I respected it. That didn't make it hurt any less. Thursday afternoon, Patrice called. "I think we have one chance to catch them." "What do you mean?" "Thomas Bennett." I frowned. "Rachel still wants that property." "Exactly." Patrice leaned back in her chair when I arrived at her office 20 minutes later. "If Thomas offers to sign the deed, she'll come." And we let her talk. Thomas and Linda arrived a few minutes later. Thomas looked exhausted. "I hate this." "I know," I said. "You don't have to do it." He shook his head. "No." He looked toward Linda. "I've spent years hoping she'd come back on her own." Linda reached over and squeezed his hand. "She isn't coming back." Those words seemed to break something inside him. Patrice explained the plan. Rachel would be told that Thomas had finally agreed to transfer the 6 acres. The meeting would happen in Patrice's conference room. She would prepare a draft deed for discussion, but nothing would be signed or notarized. Thomas would wear a small recorder clipped inside his shirt pocket. Patrice explained that Ohio generally allowed a participant in a private conversation to record it without telling the other people present. Because Thomas would be part of the discussion, she believed the recording was lawful, provided it wasn't used to further a crime. "I don't like deceiving my daughter," Thomas said quietly. Patrice answered gently. "You're not deceiving Emily. You're protecting her." Rachel responded within 30 minutes. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. She also asked one unexpected question. "Gregory will be joining me. Is that okay?" Patrice smiled. "Better than okay." Friday morning, I sat in a small office across the hall from Patrice's conference room. A live audio feed from Thomas's recorder played through a speaker on Patrice's desk. The arrangement was simple, but every word came through clearly. Patrice insisted I remain out of sight. "If Rachel sees you," she warned, "she'll shut down." Thomas sat alone at the polished oak table. His hands trembled slightly. Linda waited in the lobby with a legal assistant. She couldn't bear to sit across from Rachel again. At exactly 10 o'clock, Rachel walked in wearing a navy pantsuit. Gregory followed. He was probably in his late 50s. Expensive watch, perfect haircut, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He shook Thomas's hand like they were old friends. "Mr. Bennett." Thomas nodded stiffly. Rachel sat beside Gregory. "You changed your mind." "I've been thinking." Thomas looked down at the deed. "I don't want the family fighting anymore." Rachel relaxed immediately. "I knew we'd get here." Gregory slid the paperwork across the table. "We've already prepared everything." Patrice had been right. They hadn't even pretended this was about taxes. Gregory pointed directly at the signature line. "Once this is signed, we can use the property immediately." Thomas looked confused. "Use it as collateral." Rachel answered before Gregory could. "It's temporary." "For what?" "Our expansion." Thomas frowned. "What expansion?" Gregory chuckled. "The one Emily's house can't fully support." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Thomas looked up. "What did you just say?" Gregory realized he'd spoken too freely. Rachel shot him a sharp look. He leaned back. "Forget that." Thomas didn't. You said Emily's house. Rachel sighed. Fine. She folded her arms. The bank prefers multiple assets. So Emily knows. Rachel hesitated. She doesn't need every detail. Thomas stared at his daughter. You plan to use her home. It's just collateral. Without telling her, Rachel's patience disappeared. Oh, Dad, stop acting shocked. She leaned forward. Emily signs whatever I put in front of her when she's overwhelmed. I felt my hands clench into fists. Thomas looked like he'd been punched. You can't mean that. I do, he whispered. How did we raise someone who thinks like this? Rachel looked away. You raised someone who learned that loyalty doesn't pay bills. Before Thomas could respond, Gregory leaned across the table to pull the deed closer. The movement caught the edge of Thomas's jacket. The recorder slipped from his pocket and struck the floor. For one terrible second, everything stopped. Gregory looked down at the blinking device. What is that? Thomas didn't answer. Gregory's face hardened. He reached for the recorder, but Thomas pulled it back. Patrice entered from the hallway. Don't touch him. Gregory stood so quickly that his chair hit the wall. You set us up. No, Patrice said. Mr. Bennett asked questions about his own property. You answered them. Rachel looked from her father to Patrice, then toward the office door. Neither of them said another word. They walked out before anyone could stop them. By the time the building manager reached the lobby, they were already gone. Emily showed up at my house a little after 5 that afternoon. She didn't knock. She let herself in with the spare key I'd forgotten she still had. I found her standing in the kitchen, still wearing the same navy cardigan she'd worn to work. Her eyes were red. Not from crying, from not sleeping. You set her up. I put down the coffee mug in my hand. I gave her an opportunity to tell the truth. You tricked her. I asked her father to ask one question. Emily shook her head. You recorded her. Legally. That doesn't make it right. For a moment, I didn't recognize my own daughter. Not because she defended Rachel, because she looked exhausted. Like someone trying to hold together two completely different versions of reality. I pulled out a chair. Sit. I don't want coffee. I wasn't offering coffee. She hesitated. Then she sat. I laid every document Patrice had collected across the kitchen table. The LLC registration, the payment clauses, the copied signature, the photographs of the forged paperwork. Emily stared at them without touching a single page. Finally, she whispered, Rachel told me Gregory handled all the business paperwork. Maybe he did. So this doesn't prove she knew. No, I answered honestly. It doesn't. She looked relieved for the first time all week. Then I slid one more sheet across the table. The transcript Patrice had prepared from Thomas's recording. Emily read silently. Her eyes stopped halfway down the page. Emily signs whatever I put in front of her when she's overwhelmed. She read the sentence again. Then again. Very quietly, she asked, She really said this? Yes. Emily didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. Not certainty, but doubt, real doubt. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for that evening at Schmidt's private banquet room in German Village. Officially, I wasn't invited anymore. Rachel had convinced Emily I was trying to sabotage the wedding. I had already decided I wasn't going. Then Linda called. I'm coming. You don't have to. I do. Her voice sounded steadier than it had in Dayton. I've spent 7 years hiding from my own daughter. Thomas got on the phone next. I'm coming too. You sure? No. He laughed softly. But I'm coming anyway. At 6:30 Friday evening, I parked half a block away. Patrice stood beside me on the sidewalk. You understand, she said, this can't become a shouting match. It won't. We present facts. I know. No speeches. I smiled. I don't make speeches. Inside the banquet room, nearly 50 people were already seated. Emily looked beautiful. Rachel looked flawless. Linda and Thomas quietly walked in through the rear entrance. Rachel saw them immediately. The color drained from her face. Emily turned around. She froze. Mom, Linda smiled sadly. No. I'm Rachel's mother. The room went silent. Emily slowly stood. What? Rachel hurried over. They weren't invited. Linda looked directly at Emily. Honey. She reached into her purse and removed a stack of printed emails. Did you write these? Emily took the first page. Her face changed almost instantly. No. She looked at the signature. That's not me. Rachel stepped forward. She's confused. Linda handed Emily another. And this one? Emily shook her head. No. A third. No. By then, conversations around the room had stopped completely. Guests were watching without saying a word. Rachel looked at me across the room. Hatred flashed across her face. She knew exactly why I was there. Patrice quietly placed another folder into Emily's hands. I think you should read these too. Emily looked down. Her breathing became noticeably slower. The room remained perfectly still. Then she whispered the question every person there was waiting to hear. Rachel, she looked up. Did you put my name on those loan papers? Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Rachel looked at Emily. For the first time since I'd met her, she had no answer ready. Gregory wasn't there. There were no carefully prepared documents. No polished explanations. Just 50 silent people waiting. Finally, she spoke. It isn't what it looks like. Emily's voice stayed calm. Then tell me what it is. Rachel looked toward me, then toward Thomas and Linda. She seemed to realize there was no friendly face left in the room. I was trying to build something for us. With my house, it would have benefited both of us. Emily slowly shook her head. You used my name. Rachel didn't deny it. You would have signed eventually. Those 6 words changed everything. Emily stared at the woman she'd planned to marry in less than 24 hours. I trusted you. I know. I never even read half the paperwork because I trusted you. Rachel reached for her hand. Emily stepped back. No. Rachel's composure finally cracked. You don't understand how hard I've fought to survive. Thomas quietly spoke from the back of the room. We all fight to survive. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. But surviving isn't the same as taking from the people who love you. Rachel turned toward him. You let us lose everything. Thomas lowered his head. I made mistakes. I signed papers I shouldn't have. I trusted too easily. Then he looked directly at her. But I never forged anyone's name. The room remained silent. Gregory suddenly appeared at the banquet room entrance. He had probably been waiting outside. When he saw the folders on the table and the expressions around the room, he stopped walking. Patrice stepped toward him. I've already sent copies of these documents to the lender's fraud department and to law enforcement. Gregory's face hardened. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked back out the door. Rachel watched him leave. She didn't follow. For the first time, she was completely alone. Emily carefully removed the engagement ring from her finger. She placed it on the table between them. I can't marry someone I have to investigate. Rachel's shoulders slumped. I did love you. Emily nodded sadly. I think part of you did. But love doesn't ask someone to sign papers they haven't read. No one applauded. No one celebrated. There wasn't anything to celebrate. A wedding had just ended. But a much bigger mistake had been prevented. 3 months later, Emily and I drove to Dayton together. Thomas and Linda were waiting on the porch of their apartment with homemade peach pie. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't perfect either. Real life rarely is. The 4 of us spent the afternoon looking through old family photographs and talking about the years we'd lost to lies that should never have been believed. The 6-acre property stayed exactly where it belonged with Thomas. Emily hired her own attorney to unwind every questionable contract connected to the canceled wedding. The bank opened its own investigation into Gregory's business practices. Patrice later told me several vendors had come forward with similar complaints. As for Rachel, I honestly don't know where she went. I hope she eventually learned that trust is far harder to rebuild than wealth. Because once people begin doubting your signature, they eventually begin doubting your heart. Looking back now, I don't think this story is really about exposing one dishonest person. It's about asking difficult questions before it's too late. Love deserves trust. Marriage requires trust. But trust should never require blindness. If this story reminded you to protect both your heart and the people you love, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who might need the reminder too. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for the truth, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves and of the people who have earned your trust.